Season 2 of Matire Gemi, a bi-weekly podcast where we help you learn the Agîkûyû culture, history, and heritage in English and in a fun, light-hearted way. I'm your anchor, Jerry Wadiho Nademo Jiro wa Bariakihara. And today, as always, I'm joined by Wayaki and Kingori Wakanyi. Now, today's episode is a continuation of episode 4, where we really began the discussion on the Agîkûyû philosophy of marriage. This discussion in episode 4 was an eye-opener for so many. So if you haven't had the chance yet, I encourage you to listen to episode 4 before delving or diving into this episode. So then what will we talk about in this episode? Today, we will dig in deep into the conversation or the process of Rûracio. We're going to understand the importance, the significance, and the symbolism of Rûracio to the Mogîkûyû. We're also going to bust some common misconceptions. For example, the idea that Rûracio is bride price. And we'll also continue and have other really delicious conversations. For example, we'll answer the question of what happens when a child is born out of wedlock. How does that affect the process of Rûracio? This one was a really interesting conversation, and I'm so eager for you to hear what Wayaki and Kingori have to share with us about our culture. So lean back, open your hearts, and enjoy the dialogue. Well, okay, Wayaki and Kingori, here we are again. And I cannot tell you how excited I am to have us continue in the last episode's conversation, because it was so intriguing and so delicious. We were left wanting more. So let me start us off by turning it over to you, Wayaki, and perhaps you could give us a high-level summary of what we talked about in the last episode.
Thanks, Jerry. Njĩtagwo Wayaki wa Gĩcanga, ndĩ mũcara wa mbarĩ ya Mũturi, hamarika ma wathani ndĩ wa Mwangi, ngaciarwo nĩ Maina. Ndĩ mũihwo na airĩmu a mbarĩ ya Mbogo, na o mũthenya nĩ njugaga nĩ thayũ. Yeah, so last episode we covered we covered some of the definitions of the concepts that are used in the process of marriage in Agîkûyû culture. So we covered Rûracio, we covered Kuhikania, we covered Ûthoni, which are 3 key concepts that we wanted our listeners to understand before we could talk about the Rûracio process. And then, we also covered the part of the process of the betrothal, which is Joranio. Those were the 2 main things that we covered in the last podcast.
Perfect. And it was so delicious. Thank you, Wayaki. So, and then, I think we ended with, this story, right? That Kingori started telling us about this pre-marriage process, right? And I remember visualizing this young man running from one place to the other and just the whole experience. So Kingori, do you want to take us, where do you want to take us from here? Do we want to continue from that story? Where do we go?
Yeah, hello, Jerry and Wayaki, and our listeners. First, let me introduce myself. Ndĩtagwo Kingori Wakanyi, mũmbũi wa mbarĩ ya Marigo, ndĩ mũthuri wa kĩama wa marika merĩ ma wathani nĩ Mwangi, and I'm happy to be here as always. Na hĩndĩ ciothe nĩ njugaga nĩ thayũ. Yeah, so Jerry, going back to our story, we had our adopted young man who was going through this very interesting process. We saw how he approached his father, and how the father initiated the process, how the father ended up, starting to bridge and create this friendship with the soon-to-be father-in-law. We saw the young man, asking the girl first, and then asking, the father of the girl, the father of the bride, we saw all that build up, and it was I think a very beautiful story of love and respect. And then we were treated to a little bit of drama, where the young men, took a moate and a harika. That's an ewe and I think, what do you call a small female goat? I think it's a doe or a nanny or something like that. But they took it. Yeah, a doe. I think it's a doe. Yeah. So they took it. They drove it in there with a lot of bravado. And then on the next day, we had this elaborate process of the families coming together to visit, the bride's family or the bride's home, and a very beautiful ceremony took place. And that's kind of where we're going to be starting from today. But before I even go forward, I want to correct a few things. I did state that the beer was delivered in calabashes called digido. And that's wrong. They are not calabashes at all. Even though digido is, a bottle gourd that was used. It is not what was used in the weddings. They used inya or singular kenya, which has a huge bottom. It's really wide. That thing can fit easily 10, 12 liters of content. So it's a nice big size bottle, or even bigger. By the way, they've been much larger than that. So there was plenty of beer. Is what I'm trying to paint that image. And secondly, I did receive some feedback from some very good friends who were asking, wait a minute, what takes place first? Is it Kohada Idege, where the young men go and drive the ewe and the doe, or is it Johia Joranio? And this is one of those things that will keep happening over and over. Different regions did things differently. And so there is no 100% standardization in the way Mogekoyo used to handle their business. Yeah. But it did happen the other way around, and there was a lot of good reason for it as well.
So, King Ori, thank you for sharing that, because I know you've shared with me a few times before that when we think of the Mogekoyo today, we think of the Agîkûyû as one ethnic group, right, or tribe. Those are the words that we use. And yet, before colonization, we actually, yes, we had common language, culture, etc., and we were one group, but we almost were subgroups within the group. Maybe you could articulate that a little better than I can, which speaks to the fact that different regions or different boroughs had a little bit of different practices, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So if you are from what we call Kiabu today, you didn't go by that term. You were known as Kavete. Oh. And if you were from or Karura, exactly, Karura. Those two. And actually there are two areas. They're not the same, but that's what we call Kiambu today. If you're from Moranga, you'd be called Metumi. Which we also call Metumi Digimagoro. Well, I won't get into that.
Which is where I'm originally from, my initial ancestor.
There you go. So you are Mometumi.
Yes, Mutumi.
And then we have the Nyerians were called the Gaki. The Kerenyagas mainly were called the Dia. And also there's Geshogo. But, that may sound as if we were, there were differences. Okay, but you're right. The language is the same. Even today, you'll hear the differences in, I don't know if it's accent or accentuation, whatever it is. We talk slightly different. You'll tell. If you're a good Kikuyu speaker, you can tell someone is from a different region. But it's not just as in regions or what we call districts or counties today that had that differentiation. Even ridge to ridge, village by village, you would start to see these differences. So. Yeah, family to family. We're really a grayscale and not, this color palette or this one monolith. And even beyond that, our cousins or our brothers, the Meru the Embu. And then if you go into those communities, you find different breakdowns in those communities, like the Meru have the Igembe, Amenti, whatever, all these different groups. We also considered them by and large Kikuyu. So Agîkûyû, and we used to say, God has given us a big piece of land, a beautiful piece of land that never lacks anything, from Gongu to Karematora, which is Garbatula, all the way almost to Isiolo. Wow. So this is Agîkûyû's view of themselves, and they used to have this, even if it did not fully function as one community, they had an aspiration that they were one people in that entire region. Yeah.
That is so beautiful, and it makes me realize again the complexity, the beautiful complexity of who we are. So this is a perfect time now to kind of open up the big primary topic we're going to be talking about today. And that big topic is that of Rûracio. And I know we'll be taking ourselves down a journey and continuing the journey of the story that we started last time. But in continuing us with that story, can one of you start by first defining Rûracio for us? What is Rûracio?
I'll let Wayaki tackle that one.
Okay, yeah. So Rûracio is it's a wide term. So I'll give the literal definition like we did last time. It comes from the word Rûra and Acio. Acio in Kikuyu means them. Rûra, it means to give someone something to eat. So you're literally giving them something to eat, which in Kikuyu, we love generosity. We like to be generous. We want to anybody who goes to a true Kikuyu man or woman's home, always get something to eat. So in the context of marriage and Ûthoni, and the topic that we're discussing, Rûracio is the development of that friendship through, several meetings with the family of the bride and groom, and the process of paying dowry. So, from a layman's perspective, when they hear Rûracio, all they know or what they think of is dowry. But the true definition is it's the development of that friendship between the family of the bride and the family of the groom. And, I was doing some research over the weekend, and I came across a narrative that's been written in the Southern Kikuyu before 1903, the book by L.S.B. Leakey. And I wanted to read a little bit on it so that you can understand how the Mogekuyu thought about marriage, how it was viewed by the Europeans. And then I think it's going to be beneficial for the listener to understand
I love it.
How the Mogekuyu viewed Rûracio. So if you give me just 2 minutes or less,
we're all
I'll read
ears,
this quick narrative. Okay, so this is actually page 754 of the Southern Kikuyu before 1903. The topic is the marriage payments. So I'll go ahead and read. Before we consider the whole complicated procedure of Rûracio, we must discuss the meaning of this word. It has become a common thing in Africa to hear Europeans, even those who have been in close contact with the Kikuyu, such as missionaries and government officials, speak of the Kikuyu custom of Rûracio as though it consisted of buying a wife, quote unquote. And in recent years, under the stress and influence of European contact, it has been partially true to say that the transaction constituted the purchase of a wife. Here, however, we are concerned with customs as they were before the coming of the Europeans, and it is perfectly clear that to the Kikuyu mind, the word Rûracio had nothing to do with buying and selling as such, but signified the making of certain payments for definite purposes other than the mere enrichment of the family of a girl who was being married. The chief aim was to make the contract legally binding. The second, to make the children of that marriage legal members of the family which paid the Rûracio. And third, to stabilize the marriage. It is best, I think, to translate Rûracio as marriage insurance. For above all else, it acted as a guarantee of good faith on the part of the contracting parties. Under the system whereby Rûracio was handed over, the parents of the family of a girl would not accept Rûracio and allow a girl to marry a man unless they were reasonably sure and certain that she would remain with her husband and be a good wife to him. For if a woman left her husband without just cause and without having been unfairly treated by him, her parents and family became liable to repay the whole of the Rûracio with interest. On the other hand, if a man ill-treated or otherwise gave his wife just cause to leave him, he lost both his wife and the considerable number of stock that he had handed over as Rûracio. For this reason, a man's family would not allow him to make a marriage that was not likely to be a success if they could possibly help it. Moreover, if it became known to the members of a man's family that he was mistreating his wife, they at once remonstrated with him and pointed out what he had to lose if his wife left him through his own fault, and they did everything in their power to make him behave better. Similarly, if a girl's father and mother heard that their daughter was acting in a way that was likely to wreck the marriage, they at once spoke to her and warned her of the consequences, pointing out how seriously it would affect the whole family. So yes, that's kind of how LSB Liki sees Rûracio, and you can actually see the Mogikoyo mind was complex because this, part of the reason for Rûracio was as it was a stabilizing factor in any marriage, because it had both families making sure and watching and guiding that couple to make sure that the marriage was a success. As we know, relationships can be complex and difficult, but the families, it was an insurance policy, which means you can see that the Mogikoyo's mind was complex. He thought, how do I ensure that this marriage or this union is going to work?
I love that so much. And before we turn it over to you, Kingori, this thing that you just read, this passage, Waiyaki, is so beautiful and powerful, right? And the reason it is because first and foremost, I have to say this, right? Not that I'm giving more credit to the Mzungu, but in this case, it's a third party in the early 1900s who has observed what's happening within the Agîkûyû, who back then in the early 1900s is saying and acknowledging that Rûracio was not a purchase agreement. And in fact, he's saying that it was perhaps, like you're saying, marriage insurance, maybe what we think of today as a prenuptial agreement, right? Which is intended to protect both the man and the woman and give them reason to have an incredibly beautiful relationship, even if marriages are complex. So that, to me, just disavows all of this thing we hear where about Rûracio being this commercial thing where people are trying to bargain and get top dollar, right, for their daughter, and then the other family is trying to bargain and pay the least amount for their son, right, on behalf of their son. So this is just such a beautiful reflection. Waiyaki, thank you for sharing that. Kingori, let me turn this over to you. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, I actually wanted to say that, Louis Leakey is not the only one who arrived at that conclusion. The Routledges, in the 1905 timeline, they were also in Kikuyu land. They came across this. They came about with. They concluded something similar. Father Canalo, who usually he tends to be a bit more critical. He actually also concluded similarly. In fact, Father Canalo, who was from Rome, ended up actually thinking that the way Mogekoyo was doing it was superior to how they were doing it back home, as far as dowry is concerned, because they paid dowry, and it was actually the girl's family who gave wealth into that. And so I am also I don't have a lot of patience for people who, especially Agekoyo people who are even leaders. I've heard them, people who ought to know better, who go about saying that they're not going to endorse Rûracio because it's purchasing people. It's really ignorance of the highest resort, and it just means you don't know yourself and you haven't taken the time to get to know yourself.
Ooh, that's a big call, Wayaki. And before you continue, let me affirm what you're saying and really put it out to our listeners. That if you know anybody that even insinuates that Rûracio is quote-unquote bride price, which means you're selling a bride, send them here. If you hear of anybody who thinks of Rûracio as anything other than a powerful spiritual ritual, right, that was intended to benefit both the man and his wife, send them here. Because I think it's time for us to raise our language and no longer think of this important process that was intended to secure and protect our marriages as selling a bride, buying a bride, or some commercial negotiation activity. Thank you, King Ori. I agree with you that it's time to raise our language. So back to you, King Ori.
Sure. Let me say one thing before King Ori continues. It's going to be short. It's, there's things, Jerry, you've said, and King Ori, you've said recently and over the podcast's life, is we have to stop thinking about our culture from a Western perspective. We have to think like the Africans thought. And, Africans, we use, analogies, metaphor, symbolism in our thinking. And and we do use logic and other concepts, but we have to think about our culture from an African perspective and not from a Western perspective. It'll help. That's what's missing with a lot of people who don't understand our culture.
Agreed. King Ori, it's on you. I've interrupted you a couple of times, so this is all you now.
Sorry. All right, no worries. This is what we are here to do, is to shed this light on how beautiful this culture is. But let's go back to our hard work that is in place to make sure that we secure Njoki. It wasn't Njoki. For our it wasn't Jerry or Njoki.
It wasn't Jerry.
I think it was Dongo and Njoki.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
No, I'm making fun of Jerry.
Yeah, so it was Njoki. So Njoki, she's at home and we need to make sure that she comes our way. So it's time for that part that we that part that has to do with Rûracio. And the Rûracio did serve a lot of meaningful purpose around it. There was a lot of meaningful purpose around it. So there's that security factor that has been mentioned. There's also making sure that the children that are born of any upcoming union are belong to the Ruka or the family of the man who's paying the Rûracio. There's also the fact that you want to have the families, because this is a union of families and not just an individual. You want them to spend some time and actually also benefit from this, which is they used to eat together. There were certain goats that were given for them. They're called goimas, which are fattened rams that have been specially taken care of so that they can be given as sacrifice. And then there was also the opportunity to give maruta, what we call maha, which are other items that we're going to learn about here shortly. And also sometimes they're referred to as idoshiamogabo. But we'll get into that and why they call that. So Rûracio really, what would happen is after we've gone through, that beautiful part of the Joranio, the groom's father would select his choice of goats. Usually goats and sheep, and they would number around 30. And these 30 goats, he would inspect them and make sure they don't have any blemish. And once he was satisfied, he would call upon his son, our young man, and a few of his friends and drive them and ask him to drive them to their home yet again, the bride's home yet again. So they would do that, and they would wait until dusk when the other goats, remember goats go home in the evening, and they are kept in the mother's hut. So they would wait until all the goats that belong to the bride's mother were already in, and they would approach with these additional 30 goats, which by the way tells you how big these homes were. This was a big house.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and why 30 goats? And is it goats or sheep? Did it even make a difference?
So they're called bori, and it could be either, right? It can be either a goat or a sheep. It doesn't really matter. And bori is a term for both.
Yeah, bori is like overarching.
So, and why 30? So 30, again, this is what was seen as a significant down payment. It could be different, right? And you'll hear as we go on how they would keep adding a few numbers here and there and adjusting that number. But it's the idea that, what's a significant down payment? Because we don't want you to pay the entire price. And by the way, we haven't even told you yet what the entire price is. So what's a good show of faith? And usually 30 was seen as a good show of faith. By the way, since you asked that question, there is some evidence that shows that perhaps the number of goats that were given in total at one time was actually 30, which kind of would answer that question as well at a deeper level. But, so they would deliver the 30 goats, and as they were approaching this time, they would actually be prevented to enter. And it's not like last time that they just came and snuck in. And they would find the young men that have been married into that family. So let's say if Joki has brothers, their wives would be blocking the entrance, or her cousins' wives would be blocking the entrance to this mother's home. And they would not let them in until the young men gave them a moate, remember, an iu, to allow them to do so. And the moment they did that, usually now the women would start saying gemi, and they would say 4 gemi and not 5, 4 for the girl, because now they're saying, okay, our girl is, being spoken for, and something beautiful is about to happen for her. Yeah, and so that would be one big show that once you see those 30 goats in, that is a serious and the first real thing that says, okay, this is happening, and opportunities for unraveling are now becoming fewer. So people are committed. Both sides have had plenty of time to spend time together and know that they want to do this. And so that would be the step that they did to do to send those 30 goats. And we call those 30 goats Kiara, Weikia Kiara. It's something where you say, yep, you've done something, but you're not going to name it just yet. You're not going to say it's Rûracio. Yeah. So,
what
go ahead.
What
please.
I love so much about this is, I for some reason, the gemi being said has grasped me, because we recognize that gemi was a spiritual blessing. When you said it, you connected with spirit and the energy, that powerful energy, pouring it onto a child. And I love that we did the same thing, and we brought that spirituality, that spiritual energy, and poured it into the bride. I love it.
Yeah.
All right.
And I wish we could. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Let me say something.
I wish we could capture how much joy each one of these steps that we're merely mentioning in 5 minutes was encapsulated in it. It would be a full production. These are hours worth of events with so much going on usually. And, of course, we can't do it justice in a podcast, but, there's a lot of song and dance. There's a lot of drinking in most of these steps as we go along. And we'll try and capture that as much as we can.
Yeah, thanks, King Ray. I was going to say that, Jerry, you brought up the part of the gemis. So as we study and research culture, you will find that, these religious or spiritual aspects of our culture, they start from birth and they go through every stage of your life. So there's a connection between the games that were said when you were born, and when you're getting married, the games that are said for Shiakahe, the 5, and Shiakaire to the 4, you'll find repetitions of certain aspects of our spirituality repeating themselves in each and every stage, each and every ceremony of one's life. You'll find that connection as we continue to research our culture.
Right. Yeah, and the other thing you're seeing is that every time we say that the father is doing something, he sends his son as his proxy. You know, it's like you go do it yourself, right? You're the one. There's a clear indication that both of them are concerted and they're together on this. So this is why you needed your father to have blessed your choice, because he's going to be quarterbacking this thing all the way, right? And so, yeah, once the young men would take those goats, they would come back, report to their father, and their father would say, "Yep, everything went well," and they would now be preparing to go visit the bride's family the very next morning, carrying another 8 gourds of beer, you know. And that this will be the johi that's called johiago rumeria bori, which is literally the beer that makes the goats urinate, you know. And so they're talking about the goats they already sent, and this time they would bring an additional 10 goats. I'll keep saying goats, but I mean bori. I mean either. And they would take them with them this morning, that particular morning, and they would be met in this joyful manner as before. They would be welcomed, they'll be fed, and by the way, usually you would have to have a lot of jahe and a lot of muere. Is muere millet? But it's millet, yeah. The millet,
yeah.
Uji, the porridge, or the gruel. That's really was one of the main things that had to be there in these sessions. And at this point, not a lot of meat was being consumed, right? So these were vegetarian parties that were being held at this point. They're being held at this point. This means that you have to have a lot of food. Now we've already seen this is like the 3rd time people are visiting, or the 4th time already, in quick succession. So, and this tells you that this used to happen around the. After people had done the harvest, typically that's when you would have the time to do this. But anyway, moving on. I mean, the family would visit again with their entourage, and then they would be asked, "Hey, what brings you here?" And they'd say, "Tuoka Korashia. We've come to Russia." This is the first time they would say that. But remember, they kind of already did it, and they're topping up another 10 goats. To now make up the proper down payment that we said is called, Wekia Kiara. So now they have around 40 goats. I keep saying around 40 because you're never supposed to, at any time, have a full, multiple of 10 in anything that you've already done. So
like Kedamo Yoru.
We follow this. Or even mention it, right?
So even mention,
but
10.
it's so even now, we say it's around 40. We mean it's about, it really is around 39. It could be even more than 40, but typically, it would be around that.
41.
And so this is now the part that we're calling korashia, which now they would, they would now pour all that beer. The beer had a lot of meaning around it and who had it. There was. Really beer just about for everyone. There was, one of these inya or those Kenya, those big gourds. One of them would go to any men from the village who were present. There would be one for Aduri Keama, the Keama men. There would be one that would go to the women who had prepared the meal. There would be others. 2 of them would be given to the men of the moherega, of the woman, meaning the family, and so on and so forth. There was a protocol for how this beer was shared out. Everyone got some who was supposed to get some. And actually, one gourd was given back. One Kenya was given back to the father of the groom, and his entourage, because they're not supposed to drink a lot. Even if they came as a lot of, many people, they were never supposed to drink and get drunk, because remember what we were saying about Ûthoni, you have to be in your best behavior when you go to your in-laws, and drunkenness was certainly looked down upon. Yeah. So, a lot will be going on. And, again, they believe that once you bring these 40 goats or 39 goats, anything you bring after that, it can actually take a lifetime to secure. And I mean the rest of the goats. And they don't know how many yet. They have not been told. At this point, they would just be having a good time and getting ready for the next step of this.
So let me, if I can just add, let me make sure I've heard you correctly, King Ori. What you're saying is, yes, there was around 40 goats that had already been delivered so far. But you're saying that the rest of the Rûracio didn't happen as a lump sum, but it happened over a long-term relationship between the families. Did I understand you well?
Exactly, yes. And this part of the Rûracio is many things, but this part of the Rûracio is called Rûno. It is the specific number of usually around 100 goats that go directly to the father of the bride and her sons. They're the ones who get that, and that's the major transfer of wealth, right? This particular one, Hakuna Haraka, take your time. In fact, people never used to finish really taking it. And it is important, but it wasn't the most important part of what needed to exchange hands.
Let me say another thing. It's also called Rûno,
Right.
Also called Burishi
Exactly.
Mirogo. Those are two interchangeable terms. But you said one thing, King Ori, when you said that this occasion was people getting to know each other, and even the food was cooked by the women of the village, and then even the women from the other party might be there. And this, if you can envision it, they are getting to know each other at this particular time. The men, while they're sharing their beer or the muratina, and the women also, they're getting to know each other and to learn each other as people from different families. So it's not the occasion where, obviously today in such an occasion today we'd get caterers who would come and cook, and, maybe this family might sit here and this family might sit on this other side, and they maybe don't get a chance to intermingle and connect and know each other. You have MCs, you have an MC from this side and an MC from this side. But, the spirit of the occasion was, of course, sharing and getting to know each other. That was the most important thing. The whole saying, Dogonema Kinya, and where, and then also Ûthoni, Rûracio Rotithiraga. That's the saying that said that, once you put that down payment, Rûracio can take a lifetime, because over a lifetime, you respect these people so much, so you're not going to be barging into their homestead all the time. But every time you come, it's a small occasion where you might pay 2 or 3 goats, but you're still in the process of learning each other and respecting each other.
It was an ongoing relationship building and connection between the families.
Yes.
Absolutely. And respect, by the way, was so key. And remember, even the word itself, Ûthoni, is derived from the word dhoni, as Wayaki had stated last time. Dhoni is, to be shy. And this shyness actually went really deep. A mother-in-law, the bride's mother, or let me just give an example with myself. My mother-in-law wouldn't eat meat in front of me, because there's a level of suggestiveness. That's the sort of thing we're talking about. There would be so much decorum, that would be expected, and a lot of dhoni, and things like hugging your mother-in-law are just completely not even something you can do. Not even that, not even a sister-in-law. You're not supposed to do things like that. You can't go and hug them, because then you're allowing space for something that is unthinkable. And according to the way people used to be. And this is why you used to hear Ûthoni. Boys don't go to these ceremonies that we're talking about. They missed out. They can't.
Because
they
didn't have
can't
any
operate
decorum,
the way
yeah.
they expected to. So they were left out.
Exactly.
And so
yeah.
maybe it's the boys from the girl's family or whichever, or the boys that belong to the home where the ceremony is happening. Perhaps they were allowed to, but not the ones that are coming from the other family. Those definitely were not allowed to be there to experience this, because they could bring shame. Yeah. So
then, I can't help but think of what Waiyaki just painted, right? Where today we have, one side of the family sitting on one side, the other is sitting on the other. They both have MCs, right? And it feels like it's a negotiation stance, right?
Right.
So are we going to get there? Like, how did the negotiations happen in terms of coming up with the figure? Okay.
Yeah, we're getting there.
We're getting there.
This one would not. Yeah. This particular. Remember, we're in the process of Rûracio, but a step called Johiagothumdiria Bori. Now, at that point, once the goats have been delivered, there's a legality. Now, legally, Ûthoni no atumo, as in now you have a proper exchange, and that Korashia now signifies that the two families are officially joined, And in fact, at this point, there are those who would consider that the bride was now the young man's wife at that particular juncture once these things were accepted. But what would happen typically is that after this point, they would say, yep, we're giving you another date where at another juncture where you would come for a process called kunero mete. And this is where you're going to discuss dowry. And this now is when these folks would come back another day, and they would now really have those discussions. Now, there would be some discussions also when they were bringing these 10 goats, but it is really, and by the way, today the discussions are hotty because there are a lot of questions about money, in terms of how, the biggest discussion actually and the biggest argument is not how many goats. It's usually how much money is a goat, today. That's the biggest cause of a lot of drama in these discussions. Back in the day, the sort of things that you'd be discussing about, usually you'd say, in my family, we, daughters, we've always exchanged 100 goats or 120 depending on moherega, or even 60 depending on the moherega. But that would be not too negotiable unless there were other problems. And what are these problems? There were sometimes scenarios where that figure could be discounted if, I don't know, the girl already had a child, right? And that they would say things like "borine une to kokoro," you're taking, the man is being expected to take on more responsibility, because not only is he now taking a bride who's not, we used to expect that they would, nyarari is a girl who is upright and has not faltered and has managed to protect herself from that. But at this point, if the girl had not and she ended up having a baby and things of that nature, it was seen as less an ideal scenario, and so there could be a negotiation to lower that number, And why did they do that? It's not just because actually the girl is now damaged. I really want to put this to rest. A girl who had a child was not seen as damaged goods. What had happened is, in the response to that girl, and we'll cover this in Kohata Meruru, I think at some point, if I'm not wrong, Waiyaki. Yeah, but if there was a child out of wedlock, the young man who was responsible for that child was also fined, and it could be as much as 30 goats. All right, he was fined for that, and so now if this girl gets married, there's some understanding that if the father goes ahead and asks for the full bride price, he's the one who is now asking for, for more than he should, right?
I see.
Yeah, it's not about atisijui what. No. Those things are things that have come up juicy.
Right, because he had already received the fine that went to the man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so why are you asking now? If it's 100, now it's 130. Dude, kwani we should if we do that, then when we'll start encouraging their girls to have children outside, right?
This is such a powerful moment, King Ori. The fact that they held both the man and the woman. So first and foremost, I remember saying that the Agîkûyû did not encourage premarital sex, right? So let's agree on that, both on the man and the women's side. But when it did happen,
doesn't used to.
Okay,
doesn't.
But when it did happen, and then there was a child off of it, there were consequences, because everything has consequences. And in this case, one of the consequences was the man had to pay the fine, right? And then when this whole process of Rûracio was happening, like you just explained, because the father had already received the fine of, say, 30 or around 30 goats, right, or sheep, then the bride price could be negotiated down to account for that, so that he is not unfairly benefiting from that experience. Let me tell you that hearing this, the consequence for going something that for what was considered not moral behavior on both parts is beautiful. Just to recognize again that the way we think about our culture today may not be representative of the way the Agîkûyû thinks about the culture. Oh, thank you for that moment.
Right. And I think shame is the right word, because this thing was not supposed to follow you the rest of your life just because you made a mistake. But there were serious consequences. Very serious consequences, because
serious.
And your family is not going to be happy with the young lady who had this baby out of wedlock, because there were real consequences for them as well, right? But I want to say this: when we have a scenario like that, and there was also there wasn't the same level of merry making. And some processes were skipped over,
Okay.
Yes, because there are certain goimas, certain goats, doromes that are being given, and some of them are talking about virginity, for example, right? So and there's a lot of alcohol that has a lot to do with that. Like the dude has to give a lot of alcohol. A lot of johi has to give some magogona, because he's about to go do a sacred thing. And there's an understanding around that. So I just want to put it that way, is that, if a girl had not waited, it did bring down, the level of, fervor around this, and the level of celebration around it. So there is a consequence. Yeah.
Yes.
Not only that, let me add something else. So, for example, if a man had lived with a woman and they were not married and they had 5 children, for example, 4 children, it didn't make any sense to go and do the process of Jorio. Because really, you're already married with 3-4 children.
Yeah, exactly.
So why would you go and start asking, So there was a lot of logic also that was used in following this process. And I think it's important to mention that we are talking about the process of Ûthoni and Rûracio. So Ûthoni and Rûracio is where the man and the woman have waited until marriage, right? Ûthoni and Rûracio is there are 2 types of Ûthoni. There's Ûthoni and Rûracio, Ûthoni and Rûracio. Ûthoni and Rûracio is now the one like King Ori is mentioning. Or, for example, if you've been married with your wife for 30 years, you didn't know about Rûracio, and then now you're coming into the culture and you want to Rûracio, that's the time. Then there's some processes and steps that have to be skipped because you did not follow the process that was originally designed and put in place by our
I
forefathers.
see. Oh, that is so helpful and eye-opening.
And let me say one other thing. Thanks, Jerry. Let me say one other thing. See, and we're going to talk about this, like Ingori said, in an episode where we talk about meruru. You know, for a girl to have a child before marriage, it's really like she's having a child in her mother's house, which remember the nyoba is a sacred place. Very, very sacred. Like the nyoba of a Kikuyu woman is a very, very sacred place. So the girl, if a girl gets pregnant, even if she lives in Rome and her mother lives in Nyeri, for example, it's considered that and she has a child before marriage. It's considered that she's having a child in her mother's house. And from a cultural perspective, the only man who goes to her mother's house is her father. So there's a deep mess that is done when that happens and has to be corrected spiritually, which we won't talk about today. I think it was good to mention because it came up, but it's also a very serious topic that we'll talk about in the future.
Thank you for sharing that. It's that what we're hearing today is that there were consequences. The Mogekōyō expected morality was an important value, right? And when that was not adhered to, then there were consequences for the man and there were consequences for the woman because of what it meant spiritually to have a child out of wedlock. I cannot wait for that episode, Wayaki. Thank you. All right, King.
Let's stress that there was consequences for both the man and the women. You know, today people might just say there's consequences for the woman. No, the consequences were for both the man and the woman. We need to stress on that.
Exactly. Thank you. All right, King Ori, continue with the story.
All right, so we have Rashid now, and this is where there's a divergence in the story. A lot of Kerera from different parts of the community hold a pattern where there's going to be a continuation with from Kurashia to Kuneromete to even going into Mahana Maruta and going all the way to Rûracio before the girl can leave her mother's house.
Okay, King Ori, I'm so sorry to do this, but I want to take us one step back because this one is big. I want to be sure I understood this because this whole negotiation thing is a big thing. I want to just spend a little bit more time there. So if I heard you correct, did I hear you correctly saying that in general, the Rûracio amount is already set based on your moherega, right? Yeah. And so it's a standard number that sometimes could be reduced, for example, if there was a child outside of wedlock, right? So is it a standard number or was it like today where we negotiated because my daughter is so beautiful, she's hardworking, she's educated, so we get more for that? Like, what did that process look like?
Excellent question. It is such a standard number, it's not even funny. You cannot ask for more than you gave for your own wife. Ooh. It is as simple as that. Yes, it is as simple as that. So we follow what the bride price will be exactly what was paid for her mother, what was paid for her grandmother, and all the mothers going back to wherever the moherega starts. This is the process. There's nothing that changes. Yeah, and that's all there is to it. So all these negotiations, if you hear negotiations, they're not about this issue, this Runo or Borishe Mirogo. It's not about that. That's not where you should be having negotiations. There might be room for other negotiations, and there's also a lot of back and forth around when to give what, but it's not the amount. And today, I think the presence of cash as an alternative may be where the real haggling is coming in, and not necessarily how many goods.
Okay, that's very eye-opening. So ultimately, right, whatever the bride's father paid for his wife, right, paid is the wrong word, provided in terms of Rûracio for his wife, that is the maximum number, right, that you can ask for in terms of this marriage insurance.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter that she has a PhD or can cook the best chapati. That has nothing to do with anything.
And to clarify what King Ori is saying, in doing research and listening to a lot of teachers, I would say the average number of goats was for the Runo or Borishia Mirogo, which is the main dowry, the main Rûracio. It was 100 goats, which is Mirogo Keda na Keda Muyuru. That was sort of the average that was paid over the lifetime of the Rûracio, right? Depending on whether you put down 10%, 20%, whatever you put down, that was your Rûracio. It varied based on some muhirigas, it varied based on some bares, but for the most part, that's so. What King Ori is saying is, today, some families want 20,000 per goat, others want 5,000. That's because of the presence of fiat.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Keep going, King Ori.
Yes. Yeah, so it is at this juncture that we're going to our divergence, right? So we have a lot of... We've just started now. We just started Rûracio. This is day one of Rûracio that has just expired. And so what's being expected now is that they've given the down payment and they will come back for Kunero Mete. But in between that, a lot of things could happen depending on what region you're from. These folks, so a lot of folks, and this is, let me focus here first. A lot of folks would actually would resonate that now they have a bride because they've paid for her. And you would have a very interesting ceremony follow. And I just want to give, we're not going to capture everything because there's so many things that were happening in the process of Rûracio. There is several johis that were given, several beer fests that were given. There is Johia Karekeine, which was happened at the groom's house. Karekine at the groom's house. There was Johia Tumia, which was for women. Johi was taken for women who back in the woman's home for them to enjoy. They also got their own 8 gourds because of all the hard work they were putting in. A festival was put out for them. There was Yakorareria Goima, Johi, the ones now before you start to give the goimas, and that's when you start to slaughter the goimas after you do Runo. But before we get there, I just wanted to mention there are so many opportunities for people to get together. There was goimas of all manner. There were about 6 goimas that would be eaten, and so each goima is a party, and depending on the entourage, even though it's you're calling it at one goima, it could be multiple of them that are being given at one particular time, but one of them is the one that's kind of the one for ceremony, right? So there was a lot of opportunity for these families back and forth to start to meet and get to know each other as the process went by. A lot of merrymaking, a lot of eating, a lot of gemis throughout this whole time, a lot of singing, getiri, all manner of songs that were going on. It was almost, perfect and wonderful, time that could take, many, many weeks, of this back and forth. But I want to go straight to now, but like I said, at one point there's a part of the Agîkûyû culture that considered that now the bride is theirs, and so there would be that little drama I was talking about, which is actually a throwback to a different time in Agîkûyûs when we actually used to do bride kidnapping. And so they would maintain that in there in the culture. And the way it would happen was, the groom would prepare a raid with his friends to kidnap the girl. who would be at the vicinity of her mom's house and kind of conveniently positioning herself kuibiwa. You know, she's she's like, man, you know, somebody kidnapped me. You know, you know, she'd make sure, and then her friends would make sure they don't lose sight of her, and her cousins, whatever, they'd make sure they don't lose sight of her. But what would happen is that her brothers, if they are sufficiently kind of involved in this Rûracio, they would also stop keeping an eye too much around them and allow things to happen. Because otherwise, any other time, you could be killed by brothers if you try to do anything like that.
That is so fun and romantic.
Yeah, so literally, they would come and pick her up, Juju, you know, and carry her all the way to the Jama's house while she's wailing and her friends are running behind her and they're also wailing. Whoa, what? Jockey is being carried away. And the young men would pick her up and take her all the way to their mother's hut. So, you know, in Ndongo's residence, there would be, she'd be put in the mother's hut.
In the nyoba.
In the nyoba. Sorry, I shouldn't say hut, but the nyoba. Yeah. So, and she'd be there for 4 days, and in these 4 days, she would kind of refuse to eat, and she would be, even though it's kind of a play, it would be real. She would be now kind of mourning the separation with her family. And, you know, she would cry, you know, and she would refuse to eat food there. And so what would happen is her friends would sneak in her mother's cooking. And for 4 days, she would eat only her mother's cooking. And now on the 4th day, when she was done with that, on the 5th day, early in the morning, her house was being built while she was still in her mother's and her mother-in-law's hut, her
Nyoba.
home, Moshie, Nyoba.
Yeah. Let me pause you there, Kingori. So, Jerry, I don't know if you see the symbolism of the 4 days and the 4 gamis.
Ooh, I didn't see it until now. Uh-huh. Okay, this is such a delicious conversation, guys. You know, but in the interest of keeping this, you know, at around 1 hour, I'm going to ask that we maybe end the conversation here and we pick it up in the next episode because there is still so much more deliciousness for us to cover as we continue to think of Rûracio and even something we'll introduce called Gorario. So we'll end here and we'll see you on the next episode where we continue all things on the philosophy of marriage according to the Moyekōyō. See you then. Thank you for listening and for joining us on this journey where we honor our history, where we honor our heritage, where we honor our ancestors. We are grateful. You can find Matire Gemi on social media, which is Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And you can also find us on Clubhouse, where we will occasionally host some live discussions following some of our episodes. We look forward to seeing you. Our website is matire-gemi.simplecast.com. Our email is matire.gemi@gmail.com. And this podcast is hosted, produced, and contributed to by Wayaki Yeshanga, Kingori Kanyi, and Jerry Diho. Thank you, and please share this widely.